We are a wonderful and diverse group, and it's really helpful that we have a number of people who are representing specific accrediting agencies who are a part of our group, because then we have really in-depth conversations and we are able to think about what is practically possible and how we can really push the work forward. And thank you again to our advisory group, who also offers great suggestions along the way. So this is our goal, and I'll be brief with this part. We really envision a future in which accreditation is part of the ongoing learning and growth of a school community and culture, and really by that all international schools, to work towards building communities that want to be inclusive and develop inclusive practices. And so that means that things have to adjust on the accreditation agency side and on the standards by which schools have to adhere. So our three main recommendations are, one, that accreditation agencies provide clear guidance and training for the schools to make the process more representative. A lot of times when there is an accrediting team, members from schools who speak to those teams are a limited pool, and it needs to be more diverse. And we want to also disrupt the power structures that tend to influence who those people are and make it more of an equitable and inclusive group and practice. We want to build diversity and capacity of the accreditation staff and volunteers, those who are a part of and participate in the accrediting process. There's often little diversity within those groups, and that needs to change. And that only needs to change, but it needs to be something that's taken seriously. And so I know that several accrediting agencies have already started to consider things that they can do to ensure that there's equitable access for training to be on a team. And then thirdly, we are looking for accrediting agencies to actually strengthen the expectations that they have for schools. This speaks directly to what Katrina just mentioned, that schools have to demonstrate, and the standards have to align with DEIJB strategies and practices and philosophy, so that it doesn't just be, it's not just one tick box, but it's foundational for all aspects of a school, and accreditation would be required to address those things, and schools have to be accountable to those things. So recently, Nunana, who's one of our facilitators, went to the Acacia meeting, and that is the organization that actually accredits all of the accrediting agencies. And while there, he was able to present our work and speak with the directors of several accrediting agencies to say, this is what our task force is working on, and what recommendations do you have, and really begin this partnership back and forth. And his presentation was very well received, and many of the accrediting agencies said that they're going to take these three key recommendations back to their respective groups and start to process and troubleshoot how they can actually build them in as they are rewriting their standards. So we want this to pick up and have some immediate traction. And next steps for our committee and our group is that, one, we really want to share these recommendations with other accrediting groups that were not there, so beyond Acacia, so that this is for all schools in our ecosystem. And then we want to start partnering with and entering into collaborative processes and conversations with specific agencies, so that we can ensure the protocols and the adjustments and the revisions they make to their standards are in line with our philosophy, and then continue that ongoing conversation. So I think that's everything. I tried to be a little bit more succinct than last time, so I hope I got that in. But it's truly a pleasure to work with this group, and it's also really, again, exciting to see the overlap of how we're all going to start coming together in new ways. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Meredith. That was great. And actually, you remind me of something that I think is relevant here, is that the AIELOC conference recently, Kevin Simpson had invited students from several schools, and my students were there. I'm very proud of them. But without just mentioning my students, I think that it was very telling to read in the chat when students presented on what student agency looks like for them and what they need from us. It was very telling to have in the chat an overflow of messages of affirmation from the people that were attending this conference, because I think if there's one thing we've understood by now is the importance of the student voice in this work. And I think that each of our committees, I can speak for the governance committees, we're seeing that. And bravo to the students, and also bravo to all of the leaders and the educators who are having transformative relationships with these students, to actually push them, to actually encourage them to take up that agency that is so rightfully theirs, and do something with it. So thanks, Meredith, for that reminder. Next up, we have humanizing pedagogy with Michael.
Hello, can I have a thumbs up? You can see my screen. You're good, perfect. Okay, so the humanizing pedagogy group is busy making progress and getting on with the work. The following is brought to you on behalf of many dedicated volunteers contributing to the humanizing pedagogy. So in October 2022, an initial group of 11 volunteers attended the task force launch in Geneva, and the group started coming up with a shared understanding of curriculum. Then over the 2 days, the humanizing pedagogy through learning and teaching was birthed, and a commitment to decolonize, indigenize, and humanize identity-centered learning and teaching was made. Since October 2022, the group has consolidated on our working structure into 4 different development areas. We expanded our subgroups membership. We met in subgroups to establish goals and work on them, and convene regularly as a core group of facilitators to streamline our concept and strategize development. These dedicated educators are the subgroup facilitators who volunteer to make a difference in shaping international education. Now we're going to hear from each group about some of their milestones.
My name is Marina Kalinichuk. I'm part of the Humanizing Pedagogy Ways of Knowing, Doing, and Understanding working group. We're a group that meets every 1 to 2 months over the past year. The initial meetings were about establishing collaborative norms, establishing a shared understanding of what we mean by humanizing pedagogy, about getting to know each other and humanize one another within the group. And most recently, we spent our meeting yesterday sharing stories of our own international ecosystems in order to be able to establish a shared question of inquiry for moving forward as a group. What are the shared experiences, and what do we want to research further through this lens?
The practice group has been meeting and collaborating to streamline a list of commitments for educators and schools to pursue if they are going to be able to embrace practice that is humanizing for all the students. You can see our 6 commitments here. After agreeing on our 6 commitments, we recognize that we can't just have commitments, but we also have to make these commitments accessible to educators. So the current process is breaking them down into short, curated lists of relevant research, and then summarizing that research so that educators can access it fairly easily. Based on that research, we are then recommending specific actions for each of the commitments that will allow educators to start thinking about how they can apply them to their classroom. And then finally, our plan is to create a space that we could crowdsource inspirational examples of people using these actions in schools around the world to inspire one another and keep this momentum going.
The culture subgroup has been inquiring into understanding culture itself, and also looking at the mindsets and behaviors that place DIJ values at the core of decision making, the role of professional development, and activating every member of a school community, as well as learner agency that truly values voice, choice, and ownership is also being uncovered. Our next steps involve completing our research and creating our guiding principles for international schools. We are also going to be outreaching to gain different perspectives to help enhance our statements so that we can revise and also align with our other humanizing pedagogy colleagues.
Greetings from the Impact Subcommittee. We are Elizabeth and David, and we have been individually researching on how can we assess and measure the individual, institutional, local, and global impact of this work in our schools, in our communities, and in our societies. We have found challenging to move as fast as we would like with our individual work. So we are now setting times to work together. Even if it's virtually, we will start having working days where we will be together online. Also, we are very excited to probably have a new member pretty soon. This is where we are at, and we would like to say thank you for your attention, and we look forward to keep working with all of you soon. Bye.
So the next steps for the humanizing pedagogy, so those 4 groups kind of together, is within our committee, the completion of the research-driven commitments and to develop a profile of DEIJB-driven educators. And then with others, we want to align with other International Schools Anti-Discrimination Task Force working groups and attend conferences where members will be able to feature and represent themselves. Now, a little call to action to you. If you are interested in joining the group, right after this, I'll send in the chat the link to the slides, but also for the form. So if you're interested in joining one of those 4 groups, we would love to have you on board.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to the Humanizing Pedagogy group. Next up, we have my team, the governance team, represented here by Mark, Tanisha, and Stephen. And I think Mark and Tanisha will be speaking today. Over to you. And I will play your slides now.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Tanisha, are you going to start?
Yeah, I can do it. Can you hear me? Everybody
Yep.
hear me? Okay. Yeah, sure. Are the slides up? Okay, so I'm new to the governance team. My name is Tanisha Taylor. I'm here joining you from Jordan, Amman. First of all, let's go ahead and switch slides here. So the governing bodies of schools are ultimately accountable for the safety of all students and staff through the principal through the principal for the education of the children. They are also accountable for risk management, finances, teaching, and learning facilities, and above all are the drivers of school culture. So this group is really focused on how the governing of the schools work for DEIJ and anti-discrimination. Next slide. The governance committee is divided into 4 subcommittees with one aim, and that's to address identified forces to work towards inclusive and anti-discriminatory mission and vision aligned governance. The first subcommittee is data collection, where they hope to gather, analyze, and disseminate comprehensive data on current government practices to identify areas for DEIJ integration. The second subcommittee is board training, to train and empower boards with knowledge, skills, and mindset. The third is board representation, where they advocate for inclusive DEIJ board attitudes and compositions. And the fourth is board DEIJ integration. I apologize for my stuttering. I got a new mouthpiece. It is really tripping me up. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the first subcommittee is data collection. And that group is a data-driven and research-based approach that empowers schools to make informed decisions. The intent of this subcommittee is to drive positive change in governance structures towards inclusivity. There is some data prior to the establishment of this subcommittee where data was gathered through a survey. What they found from this prior survey is that more work needs to be done to refine and revise the survey. The survey that they're working on seems to lack sufficient and a holistic key points. So the next steps of this committee is to revise this survey and redistribute it, as also distribute it to schools that have not yet seen the survey. This subcommittee is also determined to gather data from the other subcommittees and other groups noting the overlap and usefulness of data-informed work in all the areas that all of the groups do. After discussion and a needs assessment from this group, the next step is to develop a cohesive and holistic action plan with the possibility of engaging external consultation. Next slide. Okay, so this slide, this subcommittee I'm reporting for is the board training. The board training group has reported on existing board training models and expressed the need for creating a standardized DEIJ board training. If such a program exists, they would like to examine it. They'd like it to be research-based. They're also looking to identify gaps and outline key components and name the professional bodies who could develop a comprehensive and standardized program that can be operational in international school boards with a whole school approach. They're looking for a need to empower staff and not just look for tokenism or nominal staff. And they really want to include student voices, which is in line with the student agency that we heard earlier. They're also looking to make sure that the members who are on board that represent marginalized groups are also voting members or members that hold a significant amount of power. They're looking at sharing successful experience of training, relevant avenues that could also be beneficial. Next slide. I think this slide is Mark.
Yes, thank you very much, Tanisha.
You're welcome.
Obviously, it's very interesting just to look at boards, how they function, and what's the link to the school, and there are a lot of different board structures and schools for proprietary, non-for-profit, government-funded, and so on and so forth. So it's not a straight shot on that one. So the one thing I think which is interesting is in typically schools, it's the head of school, which is really the link between the school itself and actually the governance is the common thing. So I would say the role of the head is critical in the process. So we sort of came up with different aspects here as recommendations. And I do believe that a lot of power can be yielded, not just from a top down. Yes, top down, I'm sorry, is important, but also bottom up. And I think that's one aspect that's very important to also mention. But we came up with these recommendations is that the board should try to be also reflective in terms of its composition of also the school and the student body itself in an ideal situation. When we talk here of discomfort, I think that sort of came very nicely in the first presentation by Katrina by MLK is, I think the whole DIJ concept, I mean, international schools have been somewhat, it's been part of it, but we haven't been really putting it to the forefront. And I think that having specific training, I think as Tanisha mentioned earlier, I think would really also set the tone right for the schools. And that training could be in-house by DI trained people within the school or also outside from the outside. Here again, I think it comes also back to the student agency group of saying that the aspect of protecting essentially and empowering students and listening to them, and also making sure that they're really part of the dialogue, since it is about first and foremost the students. And here, obviously, taking a recognition also as a board that, we're also a victim to some extent of our past as each of our schools, and that there are also strengths of our past, but how do we move ahead, maintaining certain traditions, but also recognizing that maybe certain things have not been done right, specifically around the topic of DIJ. Next slide, please. This is actually a cool sort of thing that Elizabeth created, and it sort of shows that process going from very ethnocentric, which a lot of schools are or have been, to a much more ethno-agile type of environment, much more inclusive environment. And you can sort of see there are different elements that I think are interesting on that, is that change process is not a straightforward process. There are ups and downs on that. And it sort of reminds me also of the 4 steps of change, which is, shock, anger, acceptance, and commitment. But I think she really did a nice job in trying to make that and put that into the context of DEIJ in schools. So next slide, please. Yeah, this one I thought was interesting, and what's very important is also to remember what the why is, and that needs to be properly communicated to the board, that it's important because we're also here for the kids. You know, it's about the emotional and also physical safety of the students first and foremost. And I think once we can explain the why, whether it's via the head, via the DIJ coordinator, student voice, I think that's part of the process of trying to get the schools, quote, on board, the board on board, as we would say. And then after that, you go through that process where it sort of goes through that. So with the hope, obviously, that one has more progressive boards, it's an easier process than closed boards, and obviously sort of intermediate is the corporate model right there, or as we call the corporate boards. Next slide, please. So here are sort of the key recommendations that came out of it. I think what the accreditation subcommittee is doing is absolutely wonderful. We here at Les American School are just in the middle of our NEASC ACE learning accreditation visit, and if those who are familiar with it, it's slowly already creeping in, which is a positive thing. Learning principle number 7 is all about inclusion. And I think if that really becomes universal in accreditation, as Nunana presented, I think that's really also a strong, powerful argument when also trying to get, quote, the board on board. The next recommendation, obviously, board training. I won't repeat what Tanisha mentioned, and focusing on really safety, you know, safety in the large sense. I mean, you know, it's not just sticks and stones will hurt my bones, but words don't hurt me. We know that that's not true. It's also the psychological, emotional safety of all community members, and more specifically, the students. The next one is really to also have that at the board level be really part of the DNA. With then number 5 is set expectations. And the last point was, I thought, a very interesting one. We talked about that quite a bit, also of using different language on that. You know, there's sort of two sides of that. Do we use sort of more negative language, anti this, anti that, don't do this, don't do that, or do we try to frame it more in a positive positive way? And we at LAS, we just went through a whole exercise that was also partially piloted by Nunana, who you've heard, who works at the school, and we came up with different values, and one of them is around respect of self and others, and the word he used, which I really love, it's now part of our guiding statements, is multiple identities. And the last one is also some of the vague language, given that, you know, international schools are all over the place, including in countries where there are very clear restrictions against different groups. And I don't know if Stephen, you want to talk to that, because you obviously come from a country where there are certain restrictions.
Mark, we need to round up now.
Okay.
Yeah, you're running over.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, I'm actually, one last slide is just a concluding slide, and then I'm done. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, team. Next up, we have the leadership team.
Hello, everyone. Well, let me see. Okay. So my name is Fandi, and together with Cam, we facilitate the leadership committee. This is an update of how have we the journey here. Basically, as you all know, it all started in Geneva. There had been about 40 members in the leadership group, and we meet every 6 weeks with people having different roles at the same time of being part of the committee. Some people come and go, and there are some of the members are here, and we are going to share how we got here. What I wanted to say is I'm so glad to see that, you know, and the understanding that we have, all of us, that this is so interconnected, so interrelated, and every piece kind of like plays a huge part in the whole. And with regards to the leadership committee, I wanted to reflect on how we started, because at the time we were wondering about what to lead, what is to lead, and who's the leader, who are the current leaders, and what is leadership in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that kind of got you to our mission statement that I like to share, just like a reminder of what where we are aiming for. And apart from kind of proactively promote best leadership approaches to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we also, I just want to remind ourselves that leaders need to be role modeling these competencies in their whole communities, improving the diverse representation of leading roles so that leaders of all backgrounds can thrive. And I'd like to inform that because those is part of the challenges that we have in terms of leadership. Okay, so this is part of our initial focus. We met every 6 weeks, and part of the things the challenges that we face is like, from where do we start this work? What part of the of what it is to be a leader and to lead can we tackle? We met several times, we did surveys, and at times, for me personally, I felt like perhaps we all had an understanding. Let's say we were all in kind of like I don't know if you know the Chinese proverb, I don't know if it's Chinese or African, where you have people kind of describing an elephant that they're touching, right? And everybody is kind of touching one part of the elephant. We all have our personal understanding of what leader and leadership is. So that's how we kind of embarked in this. First, we embarked in kind of like getting to know each other, researching papers and discussions. Then in terms of our action steps, we decided to kind of have an idea of what did we wanted to do. Some ideas that came out was kind of building a toolkit and strategies, creating awareness, and creating that equity leader profile. And we arrived at that because we wanted to kind of like understand what it says to be an IDA leader. And that's how we ended up with two subcommittees, one for creating awareness, and the other committee that is working on an equity leader profile. And I am going to pass on the mic to those wonderful committee members so they can explain the work that they have been doing. So maybe we start with the Creating Awareness Committee.
Okay.
Yes. Maybe I'll stop
Hello.
to share, will
Hi.
I?
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to connect with you all. I'll just start by saying that my co-presenter, Matthew Stewart, couldn't be with us this evening, but he's very much with us in spirit. I'm one of the newer members of this leadership subcommittee, and I'd like to start just by saying that storytelling is a powerful act. It's one that every human being can relate to because we have stories within us, we have stories around us, we have stories to tell, and we have stories to hear about and learn from. And they really do connect us. And as leaders, or in thinking of leadership and awareness, it's really important to zoom in on this idea that supporting anti-discrimination is a lifelong endeavor rather than a finite project. Awareness begins with a commitment to inquiry into the self and a willingness to acknowledge and reduce personal bias before being able to provide effective guidance to others. As leaders, we need confidence, but also vulnerability. Both are needed to have those courageous conversations where rumbling with discomfort and upholding values of respect and empathy go hand in hand, and they need to happen in psychologically safe places. In terms of taking DEIJ steps, This can be very daunting for leaders and even scary. And what's important is that our stories of DEIJ successes, however big or small, can be powerful and real-life examples that help school leaders to gain the courage necessary to take risks and to bring this work forward in their context. It is our wish to create a database of real-life stories, not just of struggles and hardships, but of successes in the DEIJ realm at our international schools that can be drawn upon for inspiration and action. Leaders in this context are challenged to be curious learners and to let go of this idea of living in the role of the expert when it comes to issues of discrimination. Because to genuinely make staff and students feel heard, seen and understood, leaders are nudged to perform simple yet powerful acts, such as slowing down, being visible, noticing, acknowledging, listening actively, asking good questions. So consider these guiding questions in terms of potential next steps on the journey. Why is anti-discrimination a priority in our community or your community? And how do we know this? Do other community members really connect to this purpose? What are forms of discrimination that exist in our community that may not be visible or openly discussed by leadership? What are appropriate ways in which a school can address such issues? How could aspects of identity, such as linguistic, cultural, gender, neurodiversity, be more intentionally woven into strategic planning, school policies, recruitment, retention practices, professional learning, curriculum design, staff meetings, support services, community events? We can see how interlinked all of the presentations are this evening. Our leadership subcommittee recognizes that awareness means actively looking forward and outward to read, research, and collect a large range of robust anti-discrimination resources. But it also means conducting invaluable ongoing research into our own school communities to respectfully document our people's stories, to elevate underrepresented voices, to deepen understanding through inclusive, school-wide decision-making processes. And at this point in time, I'd like to thank you and to pass over to Douglas Beam, who will explain the leadership equity profile from the next subcommittee. Thank you.
And thank you for those thoughts. I wanted to start by building off of what Fandy was saying earlier, that in order for leaders to be able to role model the competencies for leadership needed to point towards more diverse, equitable, inclusive, and just schools, then we need to first identify what those competencies are, and that's been the work of the leadership subcommittee. So our process has been to collaboratively articulate the principal DEIJ leadership competencies in order to construct the outcome of a profile of an equity-centered and inclusive leader. So what that looks like is we've identified several overall competencies that were related to DEIJ, and we're starting to articulate clearer look-fors underneath each of those competencies that help people understand what it means to push this work forward in the school, in schools, in local contexts. So with that, our work as a committee continues, and as we get closer and closer to finding something that is empowering and aspirational for people to be able to take practical steps in their school. And with that, I will pass it back to Fandy.
Would you like to say something?
Thank you, Andy. So I've been working on this committee, and we're really trying to push things forward and create that awareness. And actually, there'll be more and more cross communities where we'll be able to do more work together. Right, I'm going to hand back to Yasmin because I know we're up against time. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. That was great so far, all these presentations, and we are ending with, last but not least, the accreditation committee. And so, Michelle, I'm going to hand over to you, and you can just close us off after your team is done, so that we don't keep people too long. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. Michelle, you're muted.
Thank you, Yasmin. Really appreciate all of the presentations that have gone so far. And I hope that you can hear me and see everything clearly. Wonderful. Our recruitment subcommittee is comprised of about 10, 12 people, and Solwyn and I are co-facilitators. And today we're going to hear presentations from 3 of our members, Chantal Naguib, Solwyn Garcia, and Yashoda Deva. So we'd want to set the context. The importance of this particular committee is that we're trying to figure out what happens to employees in human resources throughout the entire life cycle of employees, starting from recruitment, retention, compensation and benefits, professional development, and promotion as well. And so one of the things that we want to definitely pay attention to is how we promote these things, how we enhance accessibility and diversity and access for marginalized communities within the locales that the international schools sit in. So then one of the things that we're working on is the anti-discrimination modules, and Solwyn Garcia—
Anti-discrimination modules, similar to child protection modules, would be taken every year and are designed for not just teachers, but also non-teaching staff and the parent community to really outline the school's DEIJ framework and policies that are in place, as well as really interrupt biases and stereotypes before they happen, as to mitigate them in the future. And this way, every stakeholder within the school is really clear on where the school stands. And it would also outline what would happen, the restorative practices that would happen when harm occurs. So again, it's really just naming, what the school stands for, and also naming how biases and stereotypes and racism manifests within a school. Skip that part.
Hello, everyone. Sorry about that. Now you'll hear from Chantal Naguib with regards to compensation and benefits.
So our discussions so far have yielded the following recommendations and takeaways. International schools should address disparities in health insurance by working toward equal coverage for local and expat teachers. The same applies to schools' fees for the children of employees. Schools should work on closing pay and benefit gaps and also eliminate differences between expat and local teachers in terms of working hours and leave provisions. Providing local teachers and staff with language skill improvement training and other professional development opportunities and training will be crucial in improving teacher quality and expertise. Finally, establishing standardized skill scales for degrees, experiences, and languages is a crucial step in promoting equity and fairness within educational institutions for teachers and staff. Thank you for your attention.
So one of the things that we found as we were looking at the disparities that happen in international schools between the expat community of teachers and educators and the local staff is that there were differences in terms of, for instance, school fees for the children of local staff, whereas the expat communities would get a really great package sometimes the staff that are local to those areas would not get the same benefits and compensation as the expat community. And what we're finding is that this is a constant refrain that this is happening and we need to address it. And so that's just at the level of looking at what happens between the expats and the local community. But think about also just within the international school community as a whole, we need to look at compensation and benefits and look like, for instance, at disparities between men and women and so on and so forth. These are the traditional kinds of things you look at. So at this point, we want to also share, Yashoda Devas, who's representing the accessible jobs posting in terms of the work that they're doing there.
Our subgroup focused on ways to unbias the hiring process, starting with recognizing that requiring candidates to pay fees to access vacancies may cause inequity in the talent pool. And simply put, it means that candidates from countries where the currency value is lower will find it harder to pay the fees for big recruitment agencies. And that limits the number and the variety of candidates that you get. Paradoxically, of course, these big agencies are the ones that are pushing the DEIJ mission forward. And so we have to find balance there. The other thing that we looked at was having transparency regarding visa requirements and schools posting links to government legislation and links to their own DEIJ statements to show that they are promoting inclusivity. We talked about anti-bias training for all stakeholders, including parents and board members. We also talked about requiring candidates not to provide too much personal information to avoid discrimination and focusing more on what they can do as a teacher. We talked about references that perpetuate injustices because they're confidential and oftentimes based on sexism or racism. And we actually asserted that if someone has the power to provide a recommendation, then they should be willing to stand behind it and be transparent. We talked about the perspective of the recruitment agencies and how they can remove bias from search engines, and they can also conduct regular audits of job postings on job boards to ensure best practice and to remind schools of that best practice. And they can provide advice to candidates as well on how to be more marketable and provide advice to schools on how they can be more open-minded and increase the diversity at their schools. So that's it. Thank you for listening.
So all in all, the works of the committees are progressing quite nicely. What you can look forward to in 2024 is towards the end of around May, that we'll be providing a written report of the findings from all of these committees. Now, mind you, work has been done. If you look at the themes that run through this, work has been done in terms of research, data collection, and developing toolkits to guide schools in the approach towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is truly amazing. And not only that, but we're looking at the whole gamut: leadership, governance, accreditation, pedagogy, and recruitment. So we just ask you to just stick with us. If you're interested in joining some of the committees, please go to the ISAD website and contact us so that you can become a part of this. We want to thank all of you who have presented, the co-facilitators, and we'd like to thank Joel Laban as well as Yasmin Sadri for centering us in this work, and for Cam for helping to organize all of this. Thank you so much for your attention to this endeavor. It is really worthwhile work, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a wonderful day, rest of your day.